Hello and welcome to another series of Naked Truths. It's been absolutely months, hasn't it, since we've been sat here running a Naked Truths series to support you with different options and ways to look after your dog in a more natural way and to understand your feeding, to really look at the truths behind so many beliefs that we have about our dog and so many challenges that we have about our dog. So I am actually here in the Nutrition Centre. Lots has happened since our last series of Naked Truths, actually, and we now have a wonderful nutrition centre to be able to really support you and your dog in depth with professional consults in nutrition. And we also have a lovely holistic vet, Vicky Simon, who is able to support you as well from the Nutrition Centre. So Vicky's doing online, I'm doing the online consults. Vicky is doing the in-person consults as of January. So if you are interested in booking in with a holistic vet, then do head to our Naked Dog Facebook page and there will be information about that. If you head to nakeddog.co.uk/nutrition centre, then you can actually book a consult there and then as well. So yes, as you can see, I am here with Caroline from Marketplace again. So we did a lovely puppy club series. Some of you may have caught that, and we did 4 episodes of Puppy Club where Caroline was fantastic in giving you lots of tips and tools and considerations about caring for puppies in a very natural way and understanding them really and building that bond, which I think is really important. But just before we head into our chat with Caroline today, I just also want to mention that we have had some wonderful new products that have been released and launched since our last Naked Truth series. I won't dwell too long on them because I know you're all keen to find out more about your dog's barking. So I'll just highlight the fact that I've put them here. So we do have supplements now, and they are really going down very, very well. We have rave reviews. The movement supplement as well is really, really seeming to be helping dogs. Older dogs, bringing them a new lease of life. There's videos on our Naked Dog Facebook page showing just how great that supplement's been for some of the dogs. Bone broth as well, and bone broth with herbs. So I was really keen to get some herbs into some of the bone broths. So that's in it. We also have additions to our Pure range, which is an 80-10-10 range, and that did already exist before, but we've added some great new meats to that range. So there's lots to look at now on the nakeddog.co.uk website. So let's talk about barking, Caroline. So the official title of this episode of Naked Truths is The Truth About Barking. What is your dog trying to say? So I think, first of all, just before we even explain who you are, taking that as a title, what do you envisage we will be chatting to people about today? What will you be sharing for people? What will they take away by listening today?
I think one of the things that we think about when we're talking about barking is that everyone sees it as a problem. They tend to see it as something, and I can understand that, it can be a noise disturbance. You can end up feeling stressed because perhaps your neighbours have been complaining, and we see it as a problem. But actually, it's a way that our dogs are trying to communicate some sort of need or some sort of emotion. I know when we've talked before, Caroline, you've talked about emotion being around that sort of, movement and the energy and motion of feelings, and barks are just one way for our dogs to be able to release how they're feeling. And we have to remember as well that we have bred a lot of our dogs for barking behaviours, and so when we start to complain about those barking behaviours, we have to realise that actually we chose to share our lives with that specific type of breed. So we're going to be talking about a few different sort of elements. We'll talk about barking in the house, in the garden, on walks and in the car, which I think are generally the 4 most common sort of challenges that people may have around barking with their dogs.
Yes, I would agree with that from the questions. So some of our customers have already sent in some questions, and one of them relates to dogs on walks. I'll ask you them a bit later. And 2 of them are related to dogs barking when people come to the door. So yeah, those 2 options definitely. Hadn't thought of the car actually offhand, so that's a really useful one, isn't it? Okay, so tell us a bit about your practice and how often do you tend to work with customers or clients that have this kind of issue, barking issues?
Well, barking is actually one of the biggest challenges that I get people coming to me to have consultations for. It's actually increased massively over the last couple of years with the sort of instability of people working from home a lot more during the pandemic, because what happens is then that alert barking that perhaps our dogs do was becoming a bit more prevalent. Also with lots of different dogs being brought into homes, a lot more environmental sort of stimulus is happening. So you might have that sort of almost socially facilitated barking happening, where suddenly your neighbours and the other neighbours have all got dogs in the garden, so that's setting off all of the dogs into a nice barking chorus. So there's been lots of reason why the sort of barking's become a little bit more apparent. We also I have people come to me quite a lot to deal with separation anxiety, and obviously barking is one of those one of the sort of signals that we might see if our dog is challenged by sort of being left home alone. I do work with a lot of Dachshunds, so I will say that, and they are a breed that are really known for their voice. So in my work we do have a lot of barkers, which is why we actually put together a course solely on barking.
Mm-hmm. Ah, brilliant. Okay, so people can access some resources from you then to dip in and learn a bit more about their dog's barking without even necessarily having a consult.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a 28-day course. You can do it self-paced, but we send you an email every day for 28 days, as well as lots of video resources that go over a bit more in detail of what we're going to be talking about today.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, I didn't realise that. See, we're not just here for promotion. We do want to help you. I didn't know that, but maybe you can share that at the end. That would be great. I think what a great resource to tap into as well. Yeah, interesting you say that about Dachshunds, because we have a couple of Dachshunds who come in here into the nutrition centre to buy their food. And as you know, I do quite a lot of behaviour stuff as well. And one of them does bark a lot, in fact. The other one is completely the opposite. But this particular one, Wilbur, he's on our Naked Dog Nutrition Centre Facebook page, and he was he pretty much barked at anything. I think anything that slightly worried him. And what I see happening a lot, and this may have been something you were going to say that I will reveal my tip as well, is especially with little dogs, I tend to see that they look up when they bark and they almost tense their paws. And all you have to do is sort of very nicely, because some of them obviously might not want you to do this at the time, you have to know the dog, sort of run your hand down their front legs or their back legs. You can almost see where they're the tightest. And when you release that, they seem to just stop and look, and that's the end of the barking. And anyway, so I explained this to Wilbur's mum, and she's been doing this, and she's absolutely can't believe it, because this is like the simplest thing. It's the solution for little Wilbur. Have you heard of that sort of thing before?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, a lot of the time we're talking about that sort of that difference between thinking and feeling. And when our dogs are sort of reacting to some sort of stimulus in the environment, and it could be anything. For some dogs it literally could be a bit of air going past them, and so when we obviously swap their focus, we change their posture, those sort of things, and we're obviously giving them something different to feel about, to be thinking about, and that in itself can change how they're feeling. So yeah, some of it is, sometimes we have to use some management techniques around things like the doorbells and stuff like that, because sometimes we can't be touching our dogs while we're trying to open the front door. So we do have to sometimes use some sort of training elements, things like that. But there's a lot of things just from an environmental point of view that we can do to help our dogs. Obviously we want to think of our dogs initially as a well dog, as a whole entity. So the fact that they are physically well, that there's nothing going on from an underlying health issue, because pain can be relieved in a way by dogs barking. Barking does make some dogs feel good, and if they're feeling discomfort, barking is going to release some of that. And obviously feeding them a nice diet that's going to make them feel good as well, and make them not have any excess unwanted type of hyper energy that we might not want, that might also be released through barking. So there's lots of things we want to think about in terms of underlying just well-being of the dog, but then on top of that we want to think about things we can do in terms of their environment, how they're feeling when they're out in the world, and how we can sort of give them different choices so that they don't necessarily have to opt or default to the barking response in certain situations.
Absolutely. Thinking of the whole picture of the dog rather than just a management technique to stop the barking in that moment. What you really want to do, one of my favourite sayings actually, is work with the dog, not the behaviour, because when you work with the dog, the behaviour generally doesn't then occur. So, you can use a bit of both, I guess, in some cases, as long as you're nice to the dog. Okay, so I don't know what one you're going to start with, but let's start with questions, because I think that will allow us to include all of those situations that you mentioned at the beginning. So first of all, dog walking. So barking on walking. So Karen, with a lovely spaniel called Sky, she's asked the question that how does she support her dog, because he's vocal on walks every time he sees other people or people with other dogs. So it's generally, I think it's anyone coming towards him by the sound of things, walking towards him on the walk. So this is, I guess, a classic situation that you deal with. What should Karen do in the moment, and what should Karen do for Sky behind the scenes?
Yeah, so I think I love the fact that you've asked about in the moment and behind the scenes, because what I always talk about is this sort of management and training, or there's management and well-being. It's sort of two different tracks, and we have to, because we can't get all of the training or well-being stuff fixed immediately, we need to have some sort of management that we can do just in terms of it to kind of help the situation be the best it can right now. And we have these two tracks continuing together, and eventually they combine, and we no longer need those management techniques because everything else is sort of fitted into place. So the dog feels better in the environment it's in. It feels better as a whole confident dog. So first of all, obviously here with I'm so sorry, I've got Wilbur in my head now. What was this dog's name?
Wilbur is dead cute, so I don't blame you. I probably omitted a picture of him. So yeah, Karen and Sky. So Sky,
yes, cool. Yeah, so with Sky, obviously, first of all, we do want to make sure that all of Sky's needs have been met. So, is Sky on a really good quality diet? Is Sky living, the most calm, relaxed life that he can in terms of, one of the things I actually get the course takers to do is to complete a journal. And that journal looks at a day, what happens over a day, over about a week. I say a week of minimum, but preferably a couple of weeks. And what I get them to do is track their dog's sleep. Really important. Get them to track the events that have happened that day, so what disturbances have happened, so even things like somebody coming to drop a parcel to the house, how many things have happened. What we found also during sort of lockdown time, and with people working from home a lot, is there was a lot more deliveries, so you had a lot more interruptions to your dog's day, so they weren't getting as much sleep as when you perhaps maybe went out to work, because you're at home and suddenly you're talking all the time, you're typing, you're getting up to make a cup of tea, all of those things that are disturbing your dog, and then not getting that quality rest. What sort of things does Sky do apart from those walks, and are there any other situations that Sky might bark in? And then we sort of track his barking levels on each day, and see if there is any pattern based on sort of the activities the rest of the day. So one thing I would definitely do is do that. I'd really recommend that to everybody who are looking at any sort of behaviours that's going on with their dog, but barking is particularly. And one of the biggest takeaways that clients have come back to me and said is that when they have increased their dog's sleep, the barking reduces. Okay, it's super simple, right? More sleep, less barking. And you think it's counterintuitive. If you've got a dog who's really over the top and is maybe barking all the time, let's try and wear them out. But that actually ends up with a dog who's way too stimulated. So when we have a dog who is really nicely rested, sleep is so important for our dogs. They need a sort of pretty much double sort of what we get a day, because their sleep cycles are so much shorter and we tend to disturb them a lot, and they just don't get that deep regenerative sleep that they need. So I know that you're always talking about fatty acids, and sleep is the thing I'm always talking about. So it's always that that sort of balance. So balance is really key in Sky's life. So that's one of the things we want to think about in terms of general well-being, is balance between exercise and rest, definitely, as well as making sure, obviously, from a health point of view, that he's doing okay. Then in terms of management right now, what we can start to do is give Sky a different alternative job to do. And one of the things I love doing, and there is a little video that's a training video, if you go over to the Marketplace YouTube channel, there's a video that goes through this in detail, so you can find that easily. But it's a little game called Ready, Steady, Go. And what I'll do is, as soon as the dog sees the person, I'll say ready, and then I'll say steady, and on go, I throw a treat and I get the dog moving. Because what happens is when the dog is moving, just like similarly to how Caroline was saying about touching the dog, you've changed their posture. When you get them moving, you're letting them release some of that energy through movement as opposed through barking. So I would obviously practice this at home a little bit first, or like on bits of your walk where there isn't people around. And we want him to get really excited, so that almost his subconscious comes in. When you say ready, he automatically is predicting steady is about to come. And that anticipation works really well in training with our dogs, because if they learn to predict what's happening next, they feel a little bit more in ownership of what's going on. So just saying literally simply ready, steady, and the go is the treat being thrown, and we get his body moving about and chasing. Being a spaniel, he's going to love moving his body, and if we can get him to move his body as opposed to move his mouth, then that will help you. And we would just keep doing that to keep his body. And you can also throw the treats in a different direction to the way that the people are coming, and while you're throwing the treats, try and create a little bit more space. So try and increase the distance between you and the person who's approaching. So that's sort of the things I would be thinking about initially. There's lots of other sort of training we can do, which maybe we'll talk about when we get into another question, but that's some ideas for Sky to start with.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I mean, I have a question about the journal, but I'm just thinking of what you were just saying. Would it be quite cool to kind of set this up as a situation to practice? Because I guess trying to remember to do it and how to do it correctly when you're faced with people walking towards you, it might sort of evade your memory, because you sort of hold your breath and you're sort of tensing. So, you know, is that the kind of thing I guess you do in a dog training class?
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes classes aren't appropriate for dogs who do get a little bit stressed around other people and dogs. So for Sky, it might not be that a class, unless you were going to a class that was specifically set up with a lot of room. But finding sort of stooge dogs, if you've got family dogs, or even if, because Sky reacts to people too, you could get just friends or family to meet up with you and arrange a point where they're going to come around a corner and you'll be there. And one thing that's great that Caroline just mentioned there is about you tensing up. When we tense up, we send that energy down to the dog. So really important to think about your breathing in those situations, because when we're stressed, we get really shallow in our breath. So if you can swap to nice, long, deep inhales and exhales, breathing in for a little bit shorter, for breathing out for a little longer, that's always going to be good. And you can also think about doing just actually stroking the lead as opposed to holding onto it, gripping onto it for dear life. That again is something that I practice at home. Attach the lead to a chair leg and just practice like doing strokes with your breathing, and that's a nice way to take some of that tension out. And if you find sort of doing something like Ready, Steady, Go, which is super simple, which is why I always recommend it, because it is quite an easy one to do, but if you find even that at this stage a little bit tricky, you can just purely feed your dog some treats every time they see a person or a dog, because right now that is going to at least start to create a better emotional response to them seeing those things on walks.
Yeah, okie doke. So thinking about the journal, if you're writing this down, I mean, it sounds like potentially with Karen and Sky, this is a daily thing, maybe. I don't know how busy their areas of walking are, but how much is too much? You know, if you're writing down how often it's happening, and so there's the how often, I suppose, how much is too much, and how much is too much in a situation, because surely our dogs should have a voice, you know, they should be able to express in that way.
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the things that we really need to be mindful of when we're talking about barking, is that there is obviously, just like us, if we occasionally, we might have a good cry, we might have a shout, we might, you know, just do one of those real like frustration sort of noises, or we might have a really good belly laugh. And all of those big expressions of emotion actually can feel really relieving when you do them. So we do need to allow our dogs either an alternative way to get rid of that emotion. So things like we can talk about a bit more, but things like perhaps chewing or digging instead as a way to release some of that energy. Or we need to say what is okay. So for example, for me with alert barking to the door, my dog thinks that's a job that it should do. It's been bred to bark as part of their breed makeup, and so I don't want to limit their opportunity to do what they should be doing. But I say, how many barks am I okay with? Like, how many is allowing the dog to feel like they've done something that's okay, and how many is it that's actually going to start to become more problematic? And so, for example, like, I will sort of say a thank you cue that I've introduced after 3 barks. So like, my dog's allowed to do the job, and then I say thank you, we've had the job done. They know that that's it, that I'm aware of what's happening, and that sort of thing. We're going on to a different situation now in terms of doorbells, but the same thing on a walk. Now, I know the difficulty is when we're seeing other people and our dog is barking, particularly if it's a little bit more sort of a heightened level of arousal, and perhaps the dog is maybe a little like forward leaning, lunging, that sort of thing. It can look quite intimidating, and it can be quite embarrassing for you as the caregiver for the dog. So you may feel that no barking is appropriate in those situations, but what we can do is we could maybe make the dog, allow the dog then to be able to go and do some sniffing, which for your spaniel they'd absolutely love to do. So you're giving them a really good outlet in another way to at least be able to be the dog that they want to be. So instead of saying, allowing the dog to bark, or we're trying to change the dog's response, we would run over to the grass verge and put loads of treats down, allow him to just get his nose down and be really, really busy and happy, rather than thinking about, I want to stop the barking. I think it's always worth thinking about, rather than what we don't want the dog to do, think about what we would love the dog to be doing, and then we can put our energy into that. And where we put our energy is likely to where the dog's going to put their energy. Whereas a lot of the time we look at the person and the dog coming and we're going, oh no, oh no, oh no, when's he gonna bark, when's he gonna bark? And we put all of our energy on that approaching person or dog. Whereas actually, if we go, oh my gosh, look at this grass verge, isn't it the best grass verge you've ever seen in your life? And look at all these treats that are down here, and we're putting all of our energy down, then our dog goes, whoo, that's where the place is to focus, rather than focus and fixate on the thing that's approaching.
Yeah, okay. And I'm guessing this is the kind of thing that's easier to do if you're walking one dog.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be done with 2 dogs, or 3 or 6 or whatever you've got, but you will always have the most success when you're working one-on-one. I mean, if you have a dog that finds, particularly if you're going to be walking where people and other dogs are, so if you're going to be walking on roads or parks and things like that, take your dog solo to those spaces, and if you're doing group walks, take them to somewhere where you can all enjoy being together. So go to the woods or to big fields where there's going to be space, and you can all just enjoy and embrace that time together. But it's really hard, because they will feed off each other's emotions, plus it's very hard to throw treats down for one dog if you've got one who maybe resource guards a little bit or something like that, so it all becomes a little bit more tricky and frustrating for you. I always say to clients, like, if you can do at least a couple of walks a week which are just with that one dog, so that you're putting that time into trying to help them feel better in those situations, and then manage the situation by going to calmer spaces when you've got multiple dogs together.
Okay, great advice. Hope people are busy writing this down. We touched on dogs in the household. So Jasmine with River, who's a lovely black and tan Jack Russell. Jasmine is joking, I think. I don't know if she's actually counted the barks, but she has said, is there an off switch? Does he really need to tell me 73 times that someone's at the door? So he's barking a lot, I think, but
yeah.
Tend to think, don't you, as little dogs maybe, and your vision is that they're running in circles and everything, and so what would you say to help Jasmine? I think actually Jill's question is very similar to that as well. She would like to help her dog understand that she is listening and she doesn't need to be constantly told about what's happening. Yes.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a few little things here. So again, journaling to see whether, what time of days maybe your dog is more barky. Do they ignore the doorbell when you're out, for example? Is it about alerting you, or is it because they have a real emotion around the sound, perhaps? So you can actually go out, hide, and then go and ring the doorbell and see how your dog responds to it. Do they bark, or actually are they silent? Because a lot of dogs will be quiet when the doorbell goes when you're not there. If they are alerting, again, they're doing a job, and we can think about what we think is appropriate number. So maybe 73 isn't okay, but maybe we can start with reducing to 20 and then 10 and then 5, and thinking about letting River have a little bit of barking time. But I think it's one thing within the home, when we're thinking about it in terms of stimulus. So obviously there's kind of 2 different types of barking in the home we normally get. One would be the sort of stimulus affecting barking, so the doorbell, people walking past, doors banging, that sort of stuff, and the other would be being left home alone. So obviously being home alone is a different emotional sort of section, and I think that's a topic for another day. That's something that you would really want to get some support with, and we again do have a course on that, but talking about separation related challenges is quite its own little topic. But barking around stimulus, we want to think about how we can make the environment as calm as possible. So even things like putting up some temporary frosting on your windows so that there isn't so much busyness for your dog to be stimulated by all the time. It's like if you've had a day in work where you just get phone calls all the time, and you just think, I'd actually like 5 minutes to be able to do some work rather than talk about work. It's like that if you think about your dog having people coming past all the time and they feel like they need to alert you non-stop. They're keeping a heightened state of arousal, and they're not getting to have that rest that they need. So by being able to make their environment more of a cocoon-like, more relaxing, and have something like temporary frosting or blinds closed, having some white noise on, or some music that's a consistent sort of sound rather than like TV and radio, which can be quite up and down, having something that's quite consistent that creates that sort of bubble for them, can really help them to be less reactive for as long once the doorbell goes. And then obviously we need to try and help them to have a different response to the doorbell, and that's more about sort of training, I think, in terms of, because right now they've learned so well to do what they're doing, so if we need to sort of teach them a different task, and that could be that they perhaps go to a bed when the doorbell goes, and they're going to get really lovely rewards there, and the person who comes in, if they want to, will come and greet them still. If actually the bark is because they don't really want people coming into their home, by allowing them to go to a safe space, perhaps their bed is behind a child gate that you then go and close, you're actually saying to them, I'm not going to force anyone into your area, I'm allowing you to retreat rather than feel like you have to ward off. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in fact, I love that frosting idea, because obviously back in the day we would have more net curtains and they would just get moved out of the way. So the frosting thing is actually a really good idea. I think people could do, fairly simply and cheaply.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's something we actually put up in our downstairs room, because we have our living room is right by the road, and it's people are walking back and forward all the time, and people always let their dogs come onto the grass verge, and one of our dogs finds other dogs in his space quite difficult, and so it was more the fact that he'd get quite tense, and it wasn't that he was barking at them, but he would feel quite tense about, are those people coming into our home? So we put up that frosting just to help, and it's only halfway up, and it just helps him. We still get daylight through, it still feels nice, and it actually blends in really well. It doesn't look awful, like, you might find net curtains a little old-fashioned, but the frosting actually can work. You can get different patterned ones. One client actually had a dog who used to cat watch all the time. They live where there's loads of cats, and they put this lovely sort of floral, like in a nice, like some modern, like all Achille type of design frosting that they put over a glass panel, and that's helped their dog to actually sleep during the day rather than do its job of cat watching all day, which meant it was getting no rest.
Yeah, and I think also it's in their body, they should be able to process a certain amount of cortisol when it's released, but obviously they need to be super healthy to really process constant release of that type of thing. So like you said, if you reduce the stimulation by having something like the frosting or different method of doing that works for you, then you support them. Not, it's like you're managing the situation. But I think we both agree that that is kind of one half of it, isn't it? And then the other half would be changing the dog, because there's no good just managing it, the dog with all that cortisol in the system, because there's going all that unexpressed emotion, because it's just going to come out in a different way.
Absolutely. We have to look at the dog as a whole being, making sure that it is the healthiest that it can be to be able to deal with stresses of life, but where we can make super simple things like putting up some frosting. I mean, it's such a small thing, and it's really actually very cheap. You can buy, you know, for sort of 10-20 pounds enough to cover like some really big windows. So it's not a massive investment, but it's allowing your dog just to have that downtime.
So in actually going back to the walking side of things, how do you feel about perhaps that dogs' eyesight might have a role to play in how they're reacting? Because I can remember when I taught a T-Touch workshop years ago, there was a lady whose dog only barked at black bins. And it was almost like they looked scary. Now, he hadn't had an experience with a black bin, you know, no black bin had come over and accidentally bumped into him or attacked him or anything. So it was almost like she felt that it was the eyesight that was challenging him at the time. They couldn't make out what it was, sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we're sort of talking about this in the autumn fall time of year where it starts to get darker, and although our dog's eyesight are actually better than ours during the dark, if in the night, if your dog isn't used to walking in the evening when it's darker, they can start to be more responsive to things, not only because there's probably more smells about because there's more wildlife around, but also things do look different in the dark. And I think that is the same with large dark objects. Do sometimes appear bigger, sometimes appear more threatening. Sometimes, you know, that large dark object, because there's no defining features on it, he may well have thought, is that the back of a dog, a big black dog that's facing away from me, for example. You know, unfortunately, black dogs do generally get quite a bad time of it, because it's a little harder for dogs to read their facial expressions, because there isn't that sort of shadow and light, and you can't see the eye expressions and the subtleties of eyebrow movements and things like that. So something that's big and dense and dark is going to be a little harder for our dogs to kind of understand. And things that are odd and there, you know, that shouldn't be there, often sort of spook our dogs. I know once my dog got really freaked out because there was this headless snowman. Just the base of it, the head had melted, but the base was there, and did not want to walk near that snowman. And as soon as we used some treats and kind of wandered around and ambled and slowly weaved our way towards it, was like, oh, it's just that, okay, I'll pee on it and then I'll just climb over it. Brilliant. But it's, you know, strange things which our dogs aren't expecting. Some dogs are just going to be a little bit more sort of cautious about those things. They're not quite as optimistic about the world. They don't have that optimistic approach. And so if they're pessimistic in their approach, they're going to feel like actually everything could be a potential threat. So doing lots of enrichment, scent work, things like that can all increase your dog's optimism. So that's something that I would definitely recommend.
Yeah, and eating a diet that's full of hydration, as I say all the time, liquid hydration, so really great essential fatty acids, you know, which essentially aren't in processed food. So you're only going to get that from lightly cooked fresh food or raw fresh food. That will really support your dog's body. It really will, to start to reduce and clear some of these excess hormones as well. So working with the liver to help the liver as well. It's more of a well-being thing. So we haven't covered cars. Let's just have a quick chat about cars, because I know dogs can bark a lot in cars, whereas they may not really be barking in other situations.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's a few reasons why dogs may feel uncomfortable in cars. You know, it can be literally as simple as changing their position in the car. It might make them feel better. You know, actually, you know that if you sit in the back of the car, you can sometimes get worse motion sickness than sitting in the front. So there are different sort of responses in terms of where the weight load of the car is, you know, where the air pressure is different. There's all sorts of things from that sort of physical response in the car that can be tricky for our dogs. How they feel in terms of stability as well. So if you've got them on the back seat, is it sort of sloped and angled and they can't quite get their footing and they can't grip very well, so they feel really unstable and uncomfortable? Would they be better suited in a, you know, a crash-proof crate in the boot of the car? There's some things that like that can really help our dogs. Just making, again, tiny little changes can make them feel much more confident and relaxed. Sometimes they may have had just negative experiences. Unfortunately, cars generally do bad things to dogs, because it takes them away from their mum, it takes them from one home to another if they're in a rescue home, it takes them to the vets, it takes them to all of these things, or away from things that are important to them, and so sometimes there's that sense of, again, unpredictability in the car in terms of, oh, what's going to happen, and for dogs who've had negative experiences particularly in the first few weeks of their life, where they may just have kept going to the vets and then left their first home, they think that the car is a bit of a scary place. And coupled with the fact that often puppies do suffer with some form of travel nausea, and so they start to preempt feeling sick before they get in the car. So if we think about it all as base underlying, then we've got a dog who doesn't feel very safe and confident and feels a bit vulnerable, and then perhaps they see another dog outside of the window when you're stopped at traffic lights, or they a big lorry comes up near behind you, or something like that kind of just really sets them off. And of course, there are some dogs who just are so excited because they know as soon as you open that door or the boot of the car that they are going to be released, ping out, and get to go and run around and have the best life, that they are just anticipating too much and getting way too aroused in the car. So again, we want to think about that car as a zen-like sort of environment. So can we use swap where our dog is sitting? Can they be placed into a different area of the car that might make them feel more confident? Could we cover up windows with like those child sunscreen to help protect them from having to see too much stimulus outside of the windows? Can we make them feel better by giving them a better diet, by making their tummies feel really nice and strong so that they can cope with that sort of slight nausea? Is there some scent that we could put in the car that might help them? So some of the flower waters, things like rose water, linden blossom, those sort of things that can help them feel a little bit calmer and more emotionally stable when they're in the car. Or could we just give them something to chew that gives them a nice focus when they go out in those journeys? I think there's lots of different ways that we can help them so they feel more relaxed, because I think the problem with barking in the car is that obviously it can be unsafe for the driver because it's very distracting.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm wondering how much of it's the dog feeling trapped. If they're already a bit tense in their body and then they feel trapped, it heighten that unsafe feeling then.
Absolutely. And I often say to people, who've got dogs who do have challenges in the car, is start off with 2-3 weeks break from any car journeys to start with. Just let them not have to experience it, and that allows some of those sort of emotions, some of the cortisol levels to sort of just come down, and them not having to do that every single day. It's like having to go and like be in a room of spiders every day. If you hate spiders, you wouldn't feel good doing that every day. If you hate the car, let's just remove the car for a little bit. Let's work on making them just feel the best and more comfortable that they can, and then let's make the car to be a fun place to be. So let's just do treat trails through it and allow them just to climb in and out and around the car and not have to actually have the doors closed. Let's work on getting them in and out with only one door closed, one door open, and start to build up their confidence slowly, and so that you kind of take them back almost to baby steps of learning that it's a good environment to be in.
Yeah. Okay. I'll tell you one of the things we used to do with dogs that were barking quite a lot, as well as what I said about the running the hand stuff thing, was outside of the behaviour, we would massage the dog's TMJ, their jaw, their ears, really mindfully, not quickly or not tough, we're not trying to really get in there. It was just more of stroking the ears and doing that outside of the behaviour. We saw great success, we still do see great success in dogs they're not barking as much in situations. So that,
absolutely. So many dogs have tension in that TMJ area, and it's particularly if they are a dog who's more likely to be a little bit more reactive and hold a lot of tension in their sort of shoulders and neck when they're out walking, and potentially you're maybe only walking them on a collar. That's going to be adding a lot more tension into that area. And if we've got tension and pain there, it's again a way to get rid of it is to bark. So if we can massage and release, or give them more things to chew that kind of allow them to put some of that energy out into something else that's appropriate, those things are only going to be able to help the dog feel better. And like you're saying, quite often we have to work out the situation rather than in the situation to help the dog to be effective in the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Ooh, there we are. The world agrees with us without pinging. So any final thoughts? Because we've been chatting 40 minutes already. No surprise.
I know, wicked. I mean, barking is honestly one of the things I talk about so much, and I think it's because it is a challenge, because we kind of, it's hard for us to ignore it. It's hard for us to yeah, it's not one of the things that you can just brush under the carpet like you might do with other things your dog does. You might just go, oh, I'll deal with that at some point, you know, pulling on the lead or whatever. I'll just sort of ignore that for now. I'll just take them in the car and let them off lead or something. But when we've got barking and it's there and it's prevalent and it's there all the time, it can really sort of literally do our heads in. So we tend to focus on it more. One of the things I think that's really important is to remember that this isn't your dog doing something to annoy you. It isn't something to your dog doing a thing that's naughty. It's a way for them to release how they're feeling. And if we sort of shout back to our dogs, one, you can encourage two-way conversation. So you're going to be talking about you barking, them barking. It's just you having a little chat together. For dogs who are doing it more out of fun, for dogs who are doing it out of more of an emotional need, you may be actually adding stress into that situation by you obviously using more negative responses to your dogs. So think about that sort of, you know, step out the room, calm yourself, go back in and like, let's look at like just making a connection with our dogs. Let's look at closing the curtains. Let's think about moving ourselves out of that busy street and going to a park and sniffing for food somewhere. Like think about taking yourself out of the environment so that your dog can then start to, and you can start to feel better.
It's interesting, let's just quickly touch on this again, that dogs will bark more when you're there and the doorbell goes than when you're not, which is interesting because we would imagine that the dog is barking at the doorbell, but there's a two-way thing going on there because they actually want you to notice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, dogs have been bred, as I said, you know, some of them have been bred for alerting type behaviors. You know, it's, hey, have you seen that squirrel over there? Hey, have you seen the fox? Have you seen the pheasant? You know, they've been bred to do jobs to tell us that things are happening. And significant occurrences such as somebody, a potential imposter coming through your door, who could be intruding, you know, that could be threatening them. Or it could just be that they know that when somebody comes to the house, that it's a really exciting event for them because they know that you know, somebody might come in and they might get loads of fuss and loads of treats and it's all very exciting. And so they're saying, hey mum, hey dad, like let them in, there's somebody there, I want to get started with that fun. So there is lots of different reasons. And one of the things as well, we always talk about post people, poor post people or delivery people, it's really effective strategy when somebody comes to the door and they post letters through and then you bark and they go away. How great a job did you do by barking at them? You know, you got them to go away. And so if that happens every day and you know, your main visitor to the house would be the post person, then they are every day being reinforced for that behavior, that actually the barking helps that potential intruder to disappear. And so they think that their job is being effective and they continue to do it. So again, we're just thinking about things like in that situation, you know, simply could we have an external letterbox that would make our dogs feel better? Sometimes just small things we can do. And it's not about us trying to just avoid the job and avoid helping our dogs, but it's about actually, can we make life easier for everyone immediately by doing that? And then we can look at helping our dogs overall to feel more confident so that in the future they never feel like they have to bark if they feel threatened.
Yeah, and it's interesting actually, because I think within the canine flow system and the way I think I naturally did anyway, is I would connect with the dog before I answered the door, because what we tend to see is that the dog, a bit like what you said before, the dog will follow your focus. So you're going to the door and the dog is secondary, but annoying because he's following. But actually, if you sort of get down to the dog's level or however you normally connect and be like, thank you, thanks for telling me, and then let's go and see. It's almost like they've given that charge of emotion to you then. They don't necessarily need to go on the door. Whereas if you're sort of a bit like, oh, I'm just going to answer the door, how annoying is it? Your focus is still there and the dog is following your focus to the door and yet haven't been able to discharge that charge of emotion. So of course it's going to still be aimed at the door, you know. Absolutely. So that's, you know, sometimes I think maybe if we get, like, it is similar to what you're saying about getting stressed, but just slightly different in the fact that you would address the dog first and say, you know, rather than just be like rushing to the door, because we do rush for the door actually.
Oh, we do.
It's like, I think if you haven't answered in 2 knocks, you know, you're not in.
There's a note on the door saying, please, apologies if I take a minute to get to the door. I'm just going to sort my dog out first. I will be there. You know, you can do things like that to help your dogs. And I think what I loved there was you said about you can get down and say thank you to them. The one thing I'm always saying to people is if you're using any sort of like interruptory cue to sort of say to the dog, I've heard you, I've listened, use a positive word, because if we use positive words, we're feeling more positive about what the dog's just done, and everything just is a lot easier. Whereas a lot of people will say, shut up, stop it, you know, quit it, whatever it is. And when you're using negative emotion and negative words, you feel negative emotions. So by just saying to your dog, if you want to use some sort of interrupter cue, which you know, I do teach that as an option for people, so that when they first start things, if they're using it more as a management, using a thank you and then giving a treat from those hands, or getting down, you know, thank you and getting down and stroking your dog and giving them some love and like you say, taking that energy, you're actually again thinking more positively when you start to use those positive words.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's creating that connection, because you can be like, I've heard you, still in a stressful way. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Look down to your dog. They, you know, I know people say dogs don't like being looked at, but they like being orientated towards, and some dogs do quite happy with eye contact, but they like being, you know, connected with you. So connect with them, and
where you're not acting threatening. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Yeah, I think we better wrap things up. Yes, wrap being the barky word, obviously. So, okay, Naked Truths. This is the first in our series of Naked Truths, the truth about barking. What is your dog trying to say? Really, really hope that it has helped you. Please do share it, because there are loads of dogs out there and they all bark. And I'm sure at some point they're going to upset their owners in some way. By the barking. So please do share this, because there's so many useful hints and tips. And just before we go, Caroline, do you want to just give us the link to how people find your course resource that we discussed at the beginning?
Absolutely, it's quite simple. If you go to Barketplace, so it's Barketplace, not Marketplace, barketplace.uk/barking, and you will find the course.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Really, really great advice, and great to have you here again. And yeah, I'm sure we will be interviewing you about another wonderful subject with lots of hints and tips in the future.
Lovely to talk with you.
Bye, everyone. Bye. See you again next week.
Bye.